Climate Leadership Awards 2025, Wednesday, April 16th, and wish us luck. Caring about the climate, caring about the community, changing the conversation. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we've got your black.
KBLA Talk 1580. If it wasn't obvious to you before, it should be obvious now. They don't really care about us. So excited to have joining us this morning the Moores Professor of History and African American Studies, University of Houston. He's an author. He's written about many, many topics. I don't even know the total number of books, but I do know it's more than 100 books and scholarly articles combined. He's got his Ph.D. in history from Columbia, a J.D. from the University of California at Berkeley, and his B.A. from Princeton. Dr. Gerald Horne, good morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm reading off the places you have degrees from, and I'm thinking, are all of them being defunded right this moment by the U.S. government, by the Republican administration?
Well, certainly Columbia University is in the crosshairs. $400 million stripped away in federal funds. I don't know how they're going to make up the shortfall. You probably heard the story of the Palestinian with a green card,
right,
who has been detained because of his activism around Palestinian rights, and that's shipped off to Louisiana, of all places. They're about to deport him.
Mahmoud
really
Khalil.
chilling.
Yeah.
A chilling crushing of the right to dissent. And obviously, U.S. nationals will probably be next in line for that sort of heavy-handed treatment. So universities are in the crosshairs because universities are seen as a citadel of intelligence and also as a citadel, understandably, of opposition to the Trump regime. And so they are going to be stripped. You saw what happened at the scholar at Yale Law School, also a supporter of Palestinian rights. She has been put on ice. So this is a real draconian crackdown by the Trump regime.
Yeah, it's it's on its face, it's illegal, but they don't seem to. That doesn't seem to bother them. And what I worry about is that by the time any of these things work themselves through the courts, our country will be completely in shambles, and it might not matter.
Well, not only that, but as we know, Mr. Trump has packed the U.S. Supreme Court. Of the 9 justices, he's appointed 3. There's basically a 6-3 conservative majority for any fundamental questions, such as women's reproductive freedom or affirmative action in the first case, in the first instance. And, of course, from time to time, there's a shift with Justice Roberts and Coney Barrett shifting to the so-called liberal side, but that's not necessarily the norm.
I wanted to circle back to what you said about Dr. Helia Dutagi, I think is how you say her name, the law scholar, because she was suspended from her job at Yale University as deputy director of the Law and Political Economy Project there because of an AI program that was launched by a Zionist organization, the Jewish Onliner, which just basically profiled her and smeared her, and the university went along with that and said that she was a terrorist. That's really scary. If AI can just go whoop, whoop, slice and dice, whatever is out there in the world and the internet about a person, and AI gets to designate you a terrorist and you lose your job. I mean, that the implications of that are pretty far reaching.
And obviously, we're learning that these universities, which like to style themselves as bastions of freedom of expression, are not necessarily standing tall.
Yeah.
Because the university did not necessarily have to respond to AI, for example. They could have stood by their professed principles, but they chose not to. And I think that what we're learning is the kind of country we're actually living in. Once you strip away the rhetoric and the verbiage, we see that bending the knee to the right wing is part of the political culture of the United States, at least thus far.
Yeah, it's actually, maybe I'm naive. Maybe I really am naive. It surprised me the amount of what I call preemptive surrender. People just like, oh, well, they might come after us, so we're going to scrub all DEI from our website. Oh, they might come after us, so we're going to cancel all of these programs that we have. And it's happening with corporations, it's happening with universities and individuals, and most definitely it's happening with media. That, first time there was resistance, this time people are laying down in the middle of the road before they've even been threatened.
Well, Mr. Trump said it all. He said that during his first term, he got a lot of opposition, but now, in Trump 2.0, he says everybody wants to be my friend.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out what made the difference. I mean, if you look at this recent comment from Jeffrey Sonnenfeld of the Yale School of Management, he convenes the CEOs on a regular basis, and he says that behind the scenes, they're quite critical of Mr. Trump, but they're afraid to speak out because they think that Trump and the social media army, captained by Elon Musk, will then target them for attack, and then their profits will go down, and perhaps they'll be sacked as CEO. And so, once again, we're coming to understand what kind of country we really live in.
I mean, but the thing about that, Dr. Gerald Horne, is that, I mean, it is true. All of us that have a microphone or a media portfolio have to think about that. Okay, if they come for me, I'll protest. Okay, but on the other hand, you look at Target, which has lost a ton of money, right? Because people are boycotting them as we speak, and you look at how actually these policies are hurting Tesla. It doesn't seem like, even from a corporate standpoint, it's a good move to be leaning in and colluding with the new Confederate authoritarian Republican regime.
Well, I think it's clear that Mr. Trump is leading this country over the cliff. Supposedly, the idea is that we're going through this so-called detox phase, to use the comment by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. But this detox phase is going to last quite a long time. And in the meantime, there are going to be many people who suffer, many people who die. I mean, look at what's happening with regard to the United States cutting off medical foreign aid to Tanzania, for example, where the United States was supplying a significant percentage of the healthcare budget. People are basically going to die. And that's not even counting the people in the United States who are going to be suffering. Look at all the people who are getting laid off in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is becoming a hollow shell. It's on the path to becoming the new Detroit of the 21st century. And it has a lot to do with the fact that the workforce is heavily black and that the city voted 9-1 against Mr. Trump. And so he is punishing Washington, D.C., but ultimately he's punishing the entire country.
And he doesn't care because he doesn't live in D.C. anyway. He lives in Mar-a-Lago. But the thing about this pain phase is the pain they're talking about economic pain. It's not going to impact Elon Musk or Donald Trump or Peter Thiel. But it is going to impact the middle class and the working class and the poor and the unhoused. I mean, the budget that they're trying to cram through that has this, the way they want to trim it and keep these tax cuts, massive tax cuts for the very rich, it means they're going to have to cut Medicaid, right, and other programs. That means Elon is already signaling that he wants to cut Social Security, calling it a Ponzi scheme. So that means more people living on the streets, more homeless, more older Americans who cannot afford a place to live, including in D.C. When you say long, what do you mean by long? Like, and detox implies that you'll come out the other side better. I don't see that.
Well, you are correct not to see it. As you know, I'm speaking to you right now from Canada, and Mr. Trump is punishing the Canadian economy. There are going to be tens of thousands of layoffs coming right around the bend. And he has this cockamamie scheme that somehow he's going to make Canada the 51st state. But I think what it's going to lead to is Canada helping to lead an international campaign against Mr. Trump. And then one of the questions will become, what is our leadership going to do about that? Are they going to engage in this faux patriotism and stand by their country as this foreign country, Canada, leads a campaign? Or are they going to join Canada in the attempt to put sanctions against the Trump regime?
Yep. And, well, we'll continue this conversation. Dr. Gerald Horne is my guest. Of course, you just brought up the what are they going to do. Mr. Trump fancied himself, styled himself on the campaign trail as the peace president, but it's sounding like a lot of war talk right now. And I want to get your perspective on how real or delulu these war conversations really are when we come forward. Dr. Gerald Horne and you on KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
A new day is on the horizon.
Behind every great moment in history, there's a woman whose story went untold. This March on KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing those hidden narratives to light. Hear extraordinary stories of women who transformed science, politics, arts, and community. Women you've never heard of, but should know. Celebrating Women's History Month on KBLA Talk 1580, where every story matters.
Sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. Sometimes we try to fit it all in. Sometimes we don't know what's in store. Sometimes we find what we're looking for. Sometimes we're rolling easy and free. Sometimes 1 and 1 makes 3. So much to love along this ride. That's why Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and Affiliates, Columbus, Ohio.
Our daughter Jessie loves playing detective.
A clue.
But since we discovered she has sensitive skin, we've been playing detective too.
We thought the problem was our puppy.
But it was actually our old detergent.
Aha.
So we switched to Tide Free and Gentle. Tide Free and Gentle provides an excellent Tide clean, and it doesn't leave behind irritating residues like dyes or perfumes, so it's gentle on your skin.
Case closed.
If it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide Free and Gentle.
Hey, this is Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, and for over 20 years, Parkside Economic Development Corporation has served Leimert Park and surrounding communities, empowering tomorrow's leaders and changing lives. Parkside EDC has awarded over $400,000 in college scholarships while sharing economic principles of the Big Five of money with students and their families. Parkside EDC partners with organizations like the Brotherhood Crusade to assure our youth have the financial acumen to succeed. Parkside EDC provides families and businesses with financial insights, offering free online, on-site, and on-air B-Warp presentations. The Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Programs helps our community acquire, sustain, and pass down legacy wealth. High school seniors can apply for this year's scholarship awards at parksideedc.org. Scholarships will be awarded at Parkside EDC's Gospel/Jazz Brunch on Sunday, April the 27th. For details, tickets, or donations, please visit parksideedc.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
Right. Where to start? Tariffs. We're talking about this economic pain, the rebellion that's happening. Yes, we're going to talk about the wars, but now the president is threatening a 200% tariff on European alcohol. If you want that cognac, you better get it quick. Because I guess people still aren't understanding tariffs. I've got a guy in the chat all the time. His name is Artis Moore Jr. And he says, finally, Trump's got the world out of the United States pockets. That somehow by cutting off aid to Ukraine, this is going to make things better for Americans because we won't be spending that money. Now, I understand the impulse, yes, cut the military budget, but what is happening, what I see happening is he's taking money from the middle class, the poor, he's taking money from Ukraine, give it to Israel, taking money from the poor people and middle class, give it to the rich in terms of tax cuts. How is that helping get the world out of America's pockets?
Well, there is a lot of talk and underlying talk about cutting the Pentagon budget, but you may have noticed that the major targets of this Doge, led by billionaire Elon Musk, has been the National Ocean Administration, the folks who are concerned about predicting weather and climate change, for example, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes for Health, the Center for Disease Control. We've already talked about $400 million stripped away from Columbia University for scientific research for the most part. And so I'm surprised and disappointed that your colleague in the chat has fallen for the Trump propaganda.
Yeah. And how do you see, I guess I asked you for how long, but when we talk about tariffs, this is pain for the middle class. I'm a big believer and I am an optimist. I always think we can win, but it sounds like you're feeling like these economic repercussions are long lasting. And I'm reading that the boycott of American goods from Canada to Europe is growing. Tesla sales, as I mentioned, down. Canada taking U.S. liquor off the shelves, and that's a level of trade war that I don't think I've seen in my lifetime.
Well, indeed, and in fact, I don't think that Mr. Trump factored in the point that obviously there can be retaliation. This is not a one-way street. He talks about the European Union in very disparaging terms, saying that it was designed to, quote, screw, unquote, the United States of America, which is actually false. The European Union was bolstered into being, not least by the United States, as another hedge against the growth of the then Soviet Union. And it was seen as bringing all these smaller European nations together under German and French and then British leadership would help to weaken the Soviet Union. And it turned out to be true. But, of course, Mr. Trump is not necessarily a student of history. And this question of boycotting of U.S. firms is very serious. Already you can see that Harley Davidson motorcycles are going to be hit tremendously. Kentucky bourbon is going to be hit tremendously. Probably McDonald's and Burger King and Starbucks, which of course you can now find on every other corner in Canada, will be hit tremendously as well.
Yeah, that is true. I read that Canada's got a QR barcode where you can scan, and if it says it's a U.S. product, you can reject it at checkout and find a Canadian product. That kind of stuff is just not good news for the United States. Let's talk about the war outlook. The ceasefires that was supposed to happen immediately. What was it, day one? In Ukraine. That has not happened. Now Russia is already rejecting this supposed 30-day truce that was proposed by this administration. It feels like there's escalation happening in many other parts of the world. Give me your war map and the peace outlook as you see it.
Well, as we speak, there are these war games taking place on the Korean Peninsula. There are 28,000 U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula in South Korea predominantly. We see that these war games supposedly are targeting the North Korean regime, but actually the ultimate target is the People's Republic of China. In fact, you cannot understand U.S. maneuvers globally without understanding that China is now in the crosshairs. That is to say that Mr. Trump is making nice with Moscow, not necessarily, as some of the media would have it, because he is a sort of fanboy of Vladimir Putin, but actually the idea is to do in 2025 what Kissinger and Nixon did in 1971-72 when they flipped the People's Republic of China against the Soviet Union. Now, Mr. Trump wants to flip Russia against China. I don't think it'll work, but basically that's the import of the blow up with Zelensky and the Oval Office, this move towards the so-called truce or ceasefire in the Ukraine war. I don't think Russia's going to accept the truce or ceasefire because the last time they did accept it, it was used to rearm Ukraine, and therefore it continued and escalated the war. And so the situation right now is very dangerous, particularly with regard to this confrontation with China.
Which is being underplayed. That's interesting. Yeah. So you're saying it's not because he's a Russian asset. It's because he has a strategy to turn Russia against China. But what about when you say we're going to take Canada, we're going to take Greenland, we're going to take back the Panama Canal? I mean, aren't those fighting words?
Oh, to be sure. I mean, it's taken very seriously in Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of anti-U.S. sentiment in Canada right now is off the charts. And I don't think it's going to return to a norm, that is to say, a sort of friendly border anytime soon. I think the part of the lesson that we're learning the hard way is that it takes a long time to build a major power like the United States of America. It doesn't take a long time to destroy a major power like the United States of America, particularly when you elect vandals and place them in the White House.
I mean, you really feel like the U.S. is in shambles like that at this moment already?
Well, it's headed in that direction. I mean, look at Washington, D.C. I mean, real estate is plummeting. And in fact, the latest idea of Mr. Musk is to sell a number of federal buildings, particularly in Washington, D.C. Already, commercial real estate in Washington, D.C. is headed south. Now he's going to dump even more commercial real estate on the market. That probably is going to have knock-on effects with regard to home residences as well. Now, that might be good news for those seeking to enter the real estate market and buy their first home. But for those who have most of their wealth invested in their homes, it's not necessarily good news. And then the question becomes, will there be a contagion that will spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific?
When, I also was reading something online about how, Trump and Elon Musk are tanking the stock market on purpose so all the billionaires can buy low and then rebound and sell high. But it feels like free fall.
Well, I think you intimated a moment ago that Mr. Trump may not have a plan, that he's making it up as he goes along. And I think there's something to that. I mean, he calls it the weave when he goes in one direction and then switches gears and goes in another direction. I just think that that's a mask for the fact that he really doesn't know what he's doing. What he really wants to do is punish his enemies, particularly in the Democratic Party, particularly these law firms, which are now in the crosshairs, and he wants to make a lot of money for him and his family. And he's doing the latter. I mean, I don't know if you've been following this Trump crypto coin, which now is supposedly worth about $13 billion, believe it or not. Now, I don't think that that's real, but that's what it amounts to on paper.
I didn't know it was worth supposedly $13 billion, but I did follow that. I also noted that Elon Musk has gotten a little smarter in deciding he's going to spread his quote-unquote donations around to other Republican politicians, and suddenly Marco Rubio went from, wanting to fight him to having dinner with him and being his best friend. But how is that legal, Dr. Horne? How can he have $100 million fund while being and donate to the president while being an advisor to the president? That seems really problematic.
problematic to be sure. I mean, that's a euphemism, obviously. There's so much that's going on right now.
Yeah.
That's either ethically questionable or downright illegal. But the problem, of course, is that the courts are stacked, and even if you have courageous federal district court judges who rule against Mr. Trump feels that he has the U.S. Supreme Court in his back pocket, and he has good reason to suspect that that's the case in light of that Trump immunity decision from last year, which basically gave him a get-out-of-free-jail card.
Yeah. Well, and then
get out of jail free card.
And then the pardoning of all those January 6th criminals. Okay, we got a lot to cover, but we just have a minute right here, and I want to ask you a short form question. I know you read 7 papers a day. What hot spot are people not paying enough attention to?
Oh my goodness! Let's start with the Eastern Congo. I mean, it's really spiraling out of control. You know that the Southern African nations have sent a force there to combat these rebels backed by Rwanda. But after a dozen or more South African troops were killed, the South Africans are trying to pull out. Apparently, the Southern African community will be withdrawing its troops. And there has even been talk about a deal with the United States, where in return for the United States getting a stranglehold over Congolese minerals, the United States will send so-called security forces to the Eastern Congo, which I think would be a disaster for all parties concerned.
Yikes. Yeah, it's because it's a proxy war anyway. It's a proxy war, Rwanda, doing our bidding. Now we're going to get involved directly. Yikes. We're talking with Dr. Gerald Horne. I know he'll share some good news. We'll try. But we want to be eyes wide open. News, traffic, and sports, then more on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 things you should know with BIN News. NASA will attempt again to launch a mission to retrieve astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams from the ISS. Their return was delayed due to Boeing Starliner issues and a scrubbed SpaceX Crew 10 mission. Black pastor Charlie Dates of Progressive and Salem Baptist Churches plans to give away 40,000 eggs this weekend in Chicago, Illinois to help families with rising egg prices. The giveaway will be held Saturday from noon to 2 p.m. at 6 outside locations. Officials honored first responders for their work after January's deadly mid-air collision over the Potomac. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments recognized them in D.C. Around 300 responders from 90 agencies coordinated near Reagan National Airport. And Doechii, Billboard's Woman of the Year, will headline the closing concert of the upcoming World Pride Festival on June 8th in D.C. Wicked star Cynthia Erivo will perform on June 7th. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Every day, a child in poverty waits for a sponsor is another day of hopelessness. There are thousands of kids who've been waiting over a year. End their wait. Sponsor a child with compassion today. Just text the word radio to 83393.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers sent LeBron back to L.A. for further treatment on his groin injury. The decision was made in the middle of the Lakers' 4-game road trip. The Lakers are in Milwaukee tonight and at Denver on Friday. LeBron is expected to miss at least the next 2 weeks. The Clippers found some new offense Wednesday night in Miami. Bogdan Bogdanović dropped 30 points in the Clippers' 119-104 win over the Heat. It was also a good night for Ivica Zubac, 26 points and 14 rebounds. The Clippers are in Atlanta Friday night. The Rams made it official. They released wide receiver Cooper Kupp. Kupp played his first 8 NFL seasons with the Rams. He was the Super Bowl MVP in 2021 when the Rams beat Cincinnati to win the championship. Tough decision to say goodbye to such a productive player, but the Rams need some salary cap space. Kupp's departure saves the Rams $15 million. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Fatherhood includes being present during pregnancy, delivery, and beyond, supporting your partner and advocating for your baby's health. Black fathers play a key role in reducing maternal and infant health inequalities. Join the free AIM Fatherhood program and make a difference. Visit blackinfantsandfamilies.org/fatherhood.
We've got a lot to talk about.
On January 7th, 2025, the Eaton Canyon Fire scorched Altadena, torching everything in its path. Homes, wealth, and legacy burned in one night. But will Altadena rise from the ashes? I'm James Farr. On the Conversation Live Altadena Rising, we're chronicling the recovery, the resilience, and justice for the nation. This is the show of record, unapologetically progressive. We're not blacking down. So join me, James Farr, on the Conversation Live, Altadena Rising, every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific with the rebroadcast on Sunday at noon.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Many of the 39 BLM grassroots chapters across the nation are participating in this honoring of the memory of Breonna Taylor on the anniversary of her death. This BLMLA event is taking place on Sunday, March 16th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Norman Houston Park, 4800 South La Brea in Los Angeles, the park at the summit. For special parking options and more information, visit blmla.org or go to BLM Los Angeles on Instagram. Say her name, Breonna Taylor, and join us in loving on Black women. Happy Women's History Month from all of us at KBLA Talk 1580.
We're not for everybody, but we're for everybody. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
You are, and we're talking with Dr. Gerald Horne, and there's so much to cover in such a short time. Dr. Horne, when I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but when we say that it's easier to destroy something than to build something, we're looking at the dismantling of the Department of Education, the Consumer Protection Agency, the so-called leadership of RFK, Health and Human Services. Do you think these things can be put back together? I mean, that was a short list. There's a lot of other stuff that I left out. I'm thinking about national parks with no rangers. You know, they're talking about fraud and waste, but as you pointed out, many of these things are actually things that take care of places and people and feed places and people and keep us from disease. Measles has now made its way to L.A. People die from measles. Let's say, Congress gets majorities in 2026. Let's say we get rid of him in 2028. I don't see the path, and maybe you can help me, towards getting everything back out of disarray and demolition.
It's going to be an uphill climb. Now, the good news is that there will be certain changes that will not be difficult to reverse. I mean, you saw that list, I'm sure, in the New York Times the other day of words that you're not supposed to use in Washington.
Yeah.
Racism, race, of course, diversity, equity, inclusion, black. I noticed you're not supposed to use the term black, and that was a real head-scratcher. I'm not sure why that's on the list. Now, it'll be relatively simple, it seems to me, to reverse that sort of change. For example.
Right.
These other changes, it's going to be an uphill climb. I mean, you can't wreck the Department of Education, and you can't send packing all of their investigators who are seeking to ferret out racism on campuses and expect that to be reversed just by the snap of a finger, or even with a return of an anti-GOP majority to Washington in 2026.
The thing that baffles my mind is, when we were on the campaign trail, people were saying, well, you can't just dismantle the Department of Education. It's not going to happen that quickly. But it is happening that quickly. I mean, they're defunding everything. USAID is a great example. Not that everything they do is so, is great, but a lot of what they do is great. I mean, stopping the spread of AIDS and HIV, feeding people. We had a former assistant secretary under and State Department on the show, and he was talking about Enrique Roig. He was talking about how those contractors in some of those countries, they're shutting down. They're laying off their staff. Now they don't trust the United States to even pay the bills if they were to spend the money. So those systems are not just going to come right back on. It's not like flipping a light switch.
Well, I've thought personally about some of these changes because I've been reading about how these Fulbright scholars are being basically stranded abroad. I was a Fulbright scholar in Zimbabwe, for example. That is to say, you go to teach at a place like the University of Zimbabwe and do research, but now, of course, they're cutting off the checks, and if you don't have enough money to get back to the United States, you're basically stranded in a foreign country. And
wow.
It's really remarkable, some of the things that are happening. As a matter of fact, that's part of the strategy. As you know, Steve Bannon, the Trump advisor, has talked about flooding the zone. That
right.
is to say, to have so many things happening on so many different fronts that even if you're able to put out a fire over here, you can't stamp out all of the fires that are engulfing us. That's part of the strategy.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that strategy? I mean, you're reading 7 papers a day at least, might be more by now, and writing and teaching, and you stay on top of every bit of the news. It's quite astounding what you do. How do you keep from being depressed, overwhelmed, and succumbing to the flooding the zone strategy?
Well, I take heart from the resistance, not only resistance in Washington, D.C., from the scientists who mounted that very impressive demonstration at the Lincoln Memorial just a few days ago, but of course the protests abroad. And let me underscore in this regard the meeting that's taking place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in September between the African Union and CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, etc. Reparations is the top agenda on the item. Top item on the agenda, but they're also going to, if our folks who go there have their way, the question of putting sanctions against the Trump regime. Just like Trump put sanctions on Venezuela, Cuba, and other governments to try to force a change in their policies, we can turn the tables and try to have an international campaign against the Trump regime. Now, I dare say that Canada and other nations will be willing to join us. But once again, I think it'll take a certain amount of courage because, as we said already, people are really hunkering down because they're afraid of a social media mob attacking them and driving them into poverty or perhaps even into being attacked physically.
Do you think that the resistance, as you call it, is being hidden? I feel like in 2020, CNN and everyone was covering the Black Lives Matter protests that were global. Right now, there are protests at Tesla dealerships around the world. You have whole countries dropping contracts with them. People, as you say, scientists and students and regular, everyday people from many different generations are protesting widely all over the country, and it's barely a blip on the news.
Well, I think there's something to the idea that the resistance in 2025 does not match the resistance, for example, in 2017. I mean, for example, in 2020, we had these massive protests after the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota, whereas today in Washington, D.C., Black Lives Matter Plaza is being obliterated.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing turnabout.
You know what I said about that, Dr. Horne? Calling all graffiti artists. Because they can tear that stuff down, but if we decide it's going to say Black Lives Matter, it's going to say Black Lives Matter.
Well, you know, they're probably heeding your call as we speak. But we should be clear. I don't think we should sugarcoat what's going on. I mean,
right.
I do think there's been a downturn in terms of the gravity and the amount of protesting.
Okay. And what about, my perception is also that there's a pretty sharp right turn in terms of media. I already thought it was a lie that media was liberal. It's mostly owned by conservatives and far right wingers. But now even the pretense, you know, the laying off of Joy Reid, the sort of what they're now calling the left is even more of the center than it used to be. It feels like a pretty sharp turn, and in a response to threats, direct threats, the Trump regime saying they get to pick who's on the White House press corps and not the press itself. And, and the payoffs of Trump from some of these big media corporations. How do you read it?
Well, there's something to what you say. Look at what's happening with the Washington Post under billionaire Jeff Bezos. That is to say, the fact that Ruth Marcus, a long-time critic of the Trump regime, has been forced out of writing her column on a weekly basis. Look at what's happening at your own LA Times with regard to the opinion pages, for example. I mean, look at what's happening with regard to ABC News, with regard to them paying $15 million to a so-called Trump presidential library that's not even in motion as we speak, because George Stephanopoulos said that Mr. Trump had engaged in a kind of sexual abuse that supposedly he was not necessarily convicted of or judged to be guilty of. So the media is in full retreat right now, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, well, that's why I feel blessed to work at a Black-owned outlet. Where do you look for the other news? Because you are so well informed all the time. Where, if people want to find the reporting about the protests or the reporting about the Eastern Congo, like where should they look?
Well, it's interesting. I'm surprised the media hasn't covered this. The fact that part of the problem with MSNBC and CNN is that they're leaking and hemorrhaging viewers and audience. And I think one of the reasons is because of YouTube. That is to say that folks are tuning into their favorite podcasters on YouTube, for example, as opposed to flocking to MSNBC and CNN. And I have to say, I'm doing the same thing.
So who do you like besides me? We're streaming on YouTube right now, stealing viewers from all of those places. So who do you like, Dr. Horne?
Well, I should probably give a shout out to people whose programs I appear on.
Good idea.
Connect the dots with Wilmer Leon out of Washington, D.C. I would say the Activist News Network, which is part of YouTube as well. I would say Black Power Media, for example, which I have a relationship to. But this is probably self-serving because these are all outlets which I have a relationship with.
Well, doggone it, there's nothing wrong with a little Dr. Gerald Horne love. We're continuing the conversation. We're unapologetically outspoken, unapologetically progressive, and unapologetically Dr. Gerald Horne stands. I'm Dominique DiPrima for KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
I feel so alone.
I'm embarrassed to talk about it.
How can I help my kid if I can't help myself?
I can't remember when I wasn't stressed.
I don't like stress.
When you feel overwhelmed by your thoughts and emotions, it's okay to get help. You are not alone. CalHope is here for you with free, safe, and confidential mental health resources for youth, young adults, families, and you. Find support now at calhope.org.
They say the hardest part of getting something done is getting started. Well, we did that 30 years ago when California first took on the tobacco industry. Now, smoking is down 60%, lung cancer 42%. A couple of our cities have already ended tobacco sales. A California without big tobacco isn't just possible, it's already happening. See our progress at undo.org.
A new day is on the horizon.
Behind every great moment in history, there's a woman whose story went untold. This March, KBLA Talk 1580 celebrates the trailblazers who changed our world. From Rosa Parks to Constance Baker Motley, from Katherine Johnson to Kamala Harris. These are the voices that broke barriers, challenged limits, and reshaped America. Join us all month long as we honor the women who dared to dream, fight, and lead. KBLA Talk 1580, amplifying women's stories that inspire generations.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. The Los Angeles Regional Food Bank is on a mission to fight hunger and provide nutritious food to those in need across our community. They partner with federal, state, and local programs advocating for better policies and funding for critical hunger relief programs like Cal Fresh, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. The food bank works with coalitions and local representatives to make sure hunger is addressed in every district of LA County. They also run nutrition education campaigns, raise hunger awareness, and source nutritious food for distribution, all while supporting regulations that allow food pantries to operate safely. Want to help? Visit lafoodbank.org or call 323-234-3030 to volunteer or find a food bank near you. Together, we can ensure that no one goes hungry in Los Angeles County. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminds you that we keep us safe. Every girl deserves a chance to shine. That's the belief behind Forgiving for Living, Inc. Since 1999, this organization has been empowering at-risk girls ages 13 to 18, helping them overcome behavioral and mental health challenges. Founder Wendy Gladney's personal journey inspired the mission to give girls hope and purpose through the power of forgiveness. Through their ambassador program, workshops, and annual conference, Forgiving for Living has touched over 3,000 young lives, providing mentoring, life skills, training, and tools for building self-esteem and confidence. You can make a difference. Visit forgivingforliving.org to donate, volunteer, become a mentor, or find help for a young girl in need. Forgiving for Living, Inc., building brighter futures for young girls. Visit forgivingforliving.org today. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Small businesses are the heart of America. But you don't have to go it alone. As the nation's largest nonprofit resource of expert business mentoring, SCORE has helped millions of entrepreneurs build their businesses for free. Get the connections, education, and guidance you need with SCORE. We're ready to help. Find a mentor today at score.org.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where everybody is somebody and nobody is a stranger. You belong here.
Dr. Gerald Horne is my guest. Pick up one of his books. It'll keep you busy. Keep your mind occupied. I'm working my way through Armed Struggle. It's a fat one, but it's very, very interesting. You want to share, you have so many publications forthcoming and current. You want to share what your own Gerald Horne Book Club recommendation is, Dr. Horne?
Well, the latest book just dropped a few weeks ago, African Americans in a New History of the United States of America. And I must say, obviously, we need a new history of the United States of America, because what's being taught in our classrooms as we speak about the construction of this sturdy democracy, well, obviously it wasn't that sturdy if it can be dismantled in about 55 days, which is basically what's happening as we speak. And then in a few months, there will be the capital of slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865, which speaks to that same point, which is at a time when supposedly you had these congresspersons on Capitol Hill during the antebellum period prattling and prating about liberty and freedom. Within shouting distance of their remarks, you had Africans being sold. For example, Washington, D.C. was probably the leading slave market after New Orleans in the United States of America.
Wow.
And it's that sort of contradiction that has not been sufficiently explored by historians, which makes it very difficult for us to understand the current reality, because so many of us have a romanticized view of this country. And Donald J. Trump, what he's doing, it seems to be anomalous, when actually it's wholly consistent with the trajectory and history of this country.
Mm. Yeah, I got to hurry up. I got to read a little faster because I need to read both of those new ones that you have out. Actually, simultaneously reading a couple of your books. But Dr. Horne, I have friends, and some of them are quite well versed on history. One might even be an historian, that are talking about how in authoritarian or fascist governments, borders can be closed, airports can be shut down, passports can be revoked or denied. We're already seeing the revocation or denial of passports for transgender people or the alteration of them. And you could actually end up stuck here. And it harkens back to what the example I always use of watching the Nazi movies and saying, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they get out? Well, the getting was good. Is that something that you think we should be considering as Black Americans or as progressives, as activists, getting out of town, leaving, moving, seeking asylum somewhere?
Well, I think those who are capable certainly should consider that. And I don't see that as a demerit, the fact that you seek to escape danger. I mean, after all, in the 19th century, Black people were fleeing to Canada, they were fleeing to Mexico, they were fleeing to Africa, they were fleeing to London. And so there's a long history of Black expatriation. And we should not see it as some sort of demerit or sin, the fact that those who are capable and those who are able to leave the country, because leaving the country does not necessarily mean leaving the struggle, because then you can rally Canada, where I'm now speaking, by the way. You can rally Canada to the banner of putting pressure on the Trump administration so that it will ease pressure on our communities. So there's a role for us overseas, particularly nowadays in the era of the internet.
Do you think we could get to that point? I mean, everything seems to be moving so quickly. The point of closed borders and revoked passports. I'm thinking about Mahmoud Khalil and just the total disregard for our Constitution and our rights.
Well, actually, it may be sooner than you think, at least for some of us. As I said, I'm in Canada. I plan to go across the border to the United States to pick up some mail on Saturday, but if there's a government shutdown, I might not be able to cross the border, or I might get across the border and be stuck in the United States and not be able to get back to Canada. I mean, all of us, point A, should have a passport. Point B is that those of us who are able should try to get a second passport, particularly those who have ancestry in Jamaica or Barbados, or, for example, have ties of one sort or another to Ghana, for example. I mean, this is just sane thinking in this era of Trump.
Okay, so we try to end on an upbeat note as much as we can. You've talked about being inspired by the resistance. You've talked about being able to organize and rally and resist from wherever in the world you are, whether you're team stay and fight or team solidarity from abroad. What else would you highlight that gives you hope? For me, I mean, I've been focused a lot on arts and culture, kind of referencing the Black arts movement and how that has given us strength, and it tends to be unstoppable. But what else would you highlight to keep people, strong, hopeful, plugged in?
Well, I'd like to reiterate what I mentioned a moment or two ago, which is this summit in September in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, between the Caribbean community and the African Union, reparations on the agenda. We hope to put the question of sanctions against the Trump regime on the agenda, and we should make sure that, for example, KBLA is covering this monumental, momentous event. I'd like to see Dominique DiPrima in Addis Ababa in September 2025.
Yes.
And we should be going to our churches, to our unions, to make sure that they are able to fund representatives to go to this summit, because I think it'll be stunning for the international media to see so many Black Americans in East Africa clamoring and protesting against what's happening to our people back in North America.
And what do you see as the most effective way to push back on what's happening, the authoritarianism in our country now?
Well, what we're doing right now is highly important. That is to say, the way to combat this idea of flooding the zone is basically building dams of information. And that's what we're doing on KBLA as we speak. That is to say, we need to educate as we organize and agitate, and that's what we're seeking to do as we speak.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like, well, I should take issues one at a time and do a deeper dive just because it's so overwhelming when you think of everything everywhere all at once. But I like dams of information.
Well, certainly. And I think as well, we need to revive what used to be quite common when I was a youngster, which was many years ago, which is the idea of study groups. For example, picking a book, 5, 6, 7, 8 people or more, and studying it and sharing commentary about it, and then moving on to the next book, and then the next book, and then the next book. Because we certainly have a deficit of education and information, perhaps not accidentally, but there are ways to combat that particular ill.
And one of those is by listening to and reading and following Dr. Gerald Horne. Tell us how to keep track of you, if that's even possible.
Well, it's possible. I mean, this conversation will be on YouTube if it's not already, for example, and many of my other interviews and conversations and lectures are on YouTube. And, of course, I mentioned these books that I've been dropping over the past few years.
Of course, and there's a steady stream, so you better get on it if you want to keep up with Dr. Gerald Horne. He can write faster than we can read, and that's saying a whole lot. Dr. Horne, thank you for spending the hour with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, we're talking Afropedia. It's a new way to go online, a new resource for Black Americans and Black people worldwide. LeGrand Clegg and Abid Uzuma join me next on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 things you should know with BIN News. NASA will attempt again to launch a mission to retrieve astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams from the ISS. Their return was delayed due to Boeing Starliner issues and a scrubbed SpaceX Crew 10 mission. Black pastor Charlie Dates of Progressive and Salem Baptist Churches plans to give away 40,000 eggs this weekend in Chicago, Illinois to help families with rising egg prices. The giveaway will be held Saturday from noon to 2 p.m. at 6 outside locations. Officials honored first responders for their work after January's deadly mid-air collision over the Potomac. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments recognized them in D.C. Around 300 responders from 90 agencies coordinated near Reagan National Airport. And Doechii, Billboard's Woman of the Year, will headline the closing concert of the upcoming World Pride Festival on June 8th in D.C. Wicked star Cynthia Erivo will perform on June 7th. Get BIN News on demand 24/7.
End their wait. Sponsor a child with compassion today. Just text the word radio to 83393.
This is the KBLA